Well, welcome to the Generation Podcast. My name's Martin Patterson, and it's a joy for me to host this for you. Wherever you are in the world, wherever you're listening from, thank you for choosing to join with us. We're delighted to have you. Today we are joined by Steve and Anna Griffiths, who are currently serving in Brazil, but they have previously served in Mozambique, Cambodia, and also in Singapore. Steve is also the author of an excellent book called The Axe and the Tree, and it tells the story of his parents, and in particular the harrowing trials and struggles which hit the team that they were part of in Zimbabwe. I'm going to put the link to Steve's book in the episode details below, but for now, without further ado, let me introduce Steve and Anna to you, or in fact I'll let them introduce themselves to you, and just want to say thank you to you guys for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you, Martin. It's great to be here with you. So my name is... Oh, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was just going to... It's exactly what I was about to ask you. Who are you and what do you do?
Okay, I'm Anna. I'm English and I trained as a zoologist. I was converted at the University of St Andrews at the end of my first year of study. I went on and did theological training at the London School of Theology, and then served cross-culturally in a church in the East End of London, with a very strong call to serving the Lord cross-culturally in East Asia. I went on holiday to Zimbabwe, just on my way to the orientation course for new missionaries with OMF that was to be held in Singapore. I went on holiday to Zimbabwe, and I during those 3 weeks, my life was changed around, and I never got to East Asia on the orientation course for new missionaries that I was supposed to. I'll let Steve finish that little bit of the story.
So I'm from Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. My folks were actually missionaries. They're involved in education, health work, church planting, leading a team in a remote northeastern area among what would now be called an unreached people group. And saw an amazing move of God. As you mentioned, Martin, I tell something of that story in the book that I wrote, but that more importantly, Anna edited. It would never have seen the light of day if I hadn't had such a good editor. So
it wasn't for our wives, we would not be in any places.
definitely a team effort. Anyway, I actually came to faith on a Scripture Union camp that was my father was the commandant, but they had a Shona preacher. It was actually for black Zimbabwean kids, and I was there along with them. And the Shona preacher sharing about the need to get right with God, how things had gone wrong for us as far as God was concerned, how we'd missed the mark, and all that Jesus had done for us on the cross. He explained it so clearly, and I was really moved, and I realized at that point in time, I was about 11 years old, I think, that I needed Jesus. It wasn't just enough to be part of a Christian family, that I needed to believe and trust in Jesus myself. So my folks went to reach the Shona people of Zimbabwe, and the Shona reached their son. So I just love the way God does that kind of thing. Grew up, went to university at the University of Zimbabwe, where I studied medicine, trained as a doctor, interested in public health, and in fact in tuberculosis and leprosy control. I was on my way to Mozambique with an organization called the Leprosy Mission to work. Actually, it was a creative access country at the time, going as a single when Anna came to lunch. And my father actually really enjoyed that lunch. It was Anna and two of her friends talking around the table. He was cracking lots of jokes and charming everybody. And then I was actually on call walk back to my car to go back to the hospital to finish my call. And he followed me out and said, "Which one of those girls are you going to marry?" He'd never asked me that question before, and he didn't have to ask me that question ever again. I couldn't actually remember Anna's name, so I just said the one with the long hair, I think, if you're really pressing me. So, and here we are, 30 years later,
wow.
Married. So
that's a wonderful story, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was really reluctant to challenge. One of the most challenging things about our courtship was actually Anna was heading to Thailand and I was heading to Mozambique, and how was God going to reconcile those two things? Anyway, we worked it out, and God helped us. God guided and directed us. We served in Mozambique for a number of years, and then one day when things were actually really quite challenging in Mozambique, I had been thinking about Cambodia, and which was also a very challenging place, and said to Anna, "What if I told you that I thought God might be calling us to Cambodia?" Expecting her to hurl her bowl of breakfast cereal at me. Instead, this big smile came across her face and she said, "I'd go tomorrow." So my eyes were finally opened, and after 9 years serving in Africa, we changed agencies and also changed continents and served with OMF in Cambodia.
Wow, that's really cool to hear. You guys you were saying there you've been together for 30 years, is that right? And in those 30 years, only because I know you guys a little, I know that God has also blessed you with not so little people anymore.
Not so little, that's right. We have Joshua, who's 27, and Aimée, who's 25. One of the wisest things they did was follow their mother to St Andrews. So they both studied at St Andrews, and they followed their father because they both did medicine.
Good to have that balance.
But most importantly for us as parents is that they're following the Lord Jesus, and we're so grateful for that. And they're both passionate about serving cross-culturally as well. Joshua is married. He married Rachel, who is also at St Andrews, yay! And they are living and working in Manchester at the moment, looking at short-term in Bolivia. And Aimée is on her way to start as a junior doctor, God willing, in London in August. So a lot to be thankful for the two children that the Lord has blessed us with.
It's amazing. I'd said just as we were briefly introducing you that you've served in Asia, and Steve was talking a little bit about that, going to Cambodia. You also served. Do you want to give us a little bit of a picture about just briefly what happened in Cambodia and Singapore? I touched on that, and then we'll get to where you are just now. That's okay.
Yes, it's fine, Martin. We just need to watch the clock. We don't want to spend all this time on that necessarily, or as much as we'd love to. Having served in leprosy and TB in Mozambique, Steve wasn't necessarily looking for something similar in Cambodia, but that door opened. So after our first year of full-time language and culture study in Cambodia, the door opened to leprosy and TB again. And so we were excited about that, to see that sort of strand of continuity. Mm-hmm. I had trained as an English teacher between Mozambique and Cambodia, and so was able to teach English as a second language, as well as do radio programs for those that wanted to learn English.
You're teaching civil servants in one of the government ministries.
Yeah. And very involved in a local church. That was very important to us. And really having committed to learning that language, which was just, all so confusing to us at the beginning, seeing God's hand and taking us to Cambodia and thinking this is for the next 25 years, or whatever. I think and helping other professionals serve on the team as those also working to see the kingdom of God grow through using their professions, and is equally committed to church planting. out of the blue came an invitation to serve in Singapore, and after 4 years, and we were very surprised at that. We were not expecting that at all. And it was moving from using our professions to perhaps developing other gifts and serving in the area of personnel. So and through a series of events, the Lord did confirm that move to us. So in 2005, we started in Singapore.
So, and that role was, I think we were willing to kind of, we did find it hard, as Anna said, investing in language and being involved in something that we felt the Lord had called us to as a teacher and a doctor. I think the Lord challenged us to be willing to lay down our kind of individual ministries, as it were, to facilitate other people going well into ministry. So we took up the role of international director for personnel at that time, and shared the role based in Singapore at OMF's international headquarters. So that was guiding, setting parameters for the selection of and training of new missionaries. In our time, I think we had somewhere between 800 and 900 new missionaries joining OMF, coming to orientation course in Singapore, passing through our house, and having dinner together and that kind of thing. So once again, very, very busy time, but something that we really appreciated, seeing what God was doing and calling people to be obedient to Him, to reach cross-culturally, especially to the neglected frontiers of East Asia. It was a privilege to be part of the team at that time.
Yeah, thank you for guiding us through that. I know there's so much more you could say and would love to say. I just want to pick up on that because I think that you've touched on something really helpful, because there will no doubt be people who are listening to the podcast who are thinking through maybe church ministry somewhere in Scotland or in the UK or cross-cultural ministry, laying down our ministries for God's purposes in the world is just one of those big things that we all have to wrestle through. And I suppose that's something which will be helpful for people to hear, even from your experience of, we expected that after this amount of time invested in this and learning this language and doing this thing, we would be doing this here. But actually, God sovereignly is guiding and directing and leading us forward so that He can shape us to be more like Jesus, but also to bring more people to know and love Jesus in the role He places us. It's really helpful, and a lived out, real, live experience of that you've shared. So thank you for that. You're now geographically on the other side of the world from where you were. You are now living in Brazil, and it would be fair to say that Glasgow is getting to Brazilian winter temperatures today. It's about 22. But you now live in Sao Paulo, and it's a huge city in Brazil. About, I think, is it 12 million people, something like that. Can you just give us a bit of an insight into what life is like there, and maybe what some of the joys and challenges are of living cross-culturally in that mega city urban environment in Brazil?
Yeah. Well, it's astonishing to us because Brazil is the 5th biggest country in the world in terms of land area, and yet Sao Paulo, Greater Sao Paulo, is actually 22 million people all squashed into a relatively tiny area. It's the biggest city in the Western Hemisphere, the biggest city in the Southern Hemisphere. It's a massive economic powerhouse. So around Sao Paulo and a couple of the satellite cities, they generate about 25% of Brazil's GDP. In fact, just down the street here, we've got a memorial to those who died when Sao Paulo state, which was such an economic powerhouse, tried to break away from the rest of the Brazilian Federation in sort of 70, 80, 90 years ago, but failed, and the Federation actually held and stayed together. It's known as the city that never sleeps, so notorious for the speed of traffic, for the speed at which people speak Portuguese, often swallowing their words, which makes it very entertaining for us as we try and work out what people are saying.
Sounds like you would fit in quite well in Glasgow, or have Glaswegians there, so that's
It's a city of massive contrasts as well. I mean, it's got the biggest helicopter fleet in the world. So the wealthy actually tend to get around Sao Paulo by helicopter because, to beat the traffic and so on. And at least for a while, you could even, get your helicopter via Uber. So Uber had that option. You should go to the nearest, big building that has a helipad on the roof, pick up your Uber helicopter, and away you go, kind of thing. So it's a very interesting place. I mean, there are some very beautiful cities in Brazil, like Rio de Janeiro. Sao Paulo is often people in Sao Paulo criticize the city for its kind of greyness and for the pollution and for the busyness, but they don't like anybody else criticizing it because they actually love being here and love being part of the city.
As Steve said, it is a city of contrast, Martin. So you can have some sort of luxury areas right next to slum areas, and there are massive slum areas in Greater Sao Paulo. So where people are lower income or unemployed are facing massive economic hardship right now. There are a lot of homeless people on the streets. And one of the reasons the city doesn't sleep, apart from those who work very hard, is that homeless people stay awake at night so that they are not attacked or set upon by mobs, and they sleep during the day. So that's a sad side of life here, that homeless people are too afraid to sleep at night. We are very blessed. We looked for somewhere to live. When we arrived 4 years ago, there was no one else here and no team to set up a house or anything for us, which is, the normal OMF style. We looked in an area which we were recommended because it was safe. There are such high levels of violence, gang violence, robberies, personal theft. We needed to be somewhere where we felt safe coming back to. And so our little suburb is very peaceful, low crime rates relative to the rest of the city. And so we are very blessed to be here and not to be afraid to go out, although we wouldn't choose to stay up late at night. One of the challenges that we faced when we arrived is, for instance, our small group at church meets weekly to study the Bible, and it starts at 9:30 at night. Now, for us, I'm winding down by 9:30, but they're just beginning. And because it's across town, we don't have a car, we get an Uber or something. We'd be coming back in the small hours.
Do you get one of those helicopters? How you see?
Our budget doesn't quite stretch that far.
And we'd be coming back in the small hours of the morning. And again, so slightly nerve-wracking always, praying that you get home safely. But it is, the violence in the city in the country actually is of concern, and I think was of concern to our friends and family who knew we were moving here.
Yeah, that's really helpful insight to where you are, and it gives us nice context to understand the backdrop of ministry that you guys are involved in. But if I'm someone listening in and I've heard that you've been involved in ministry in Cambodia, Singapore, are continuing to serve with OMF, there's predominantly an East Asian philosophy for ministry. How on earth does Sao Paulo and Brazil marry up with reaching out to people who are from an East Asian background? How did you end up in the place you are, and what is the role that you have in Brazil?
Whoa! Okay, so one of the questions we were asked a lot, well, actually we still asked, is are you still with OMF? Because OMF's focus is on East Asia. What on earth are you doing in Latin America? And I think if I was going to sort of summarize it, to put it in a nutshell, we are mobilizing, we are making known the needs of East Asia here, longing and praying to see people called and responding to God's call, obviously, to reach the people of East Asia for Jesus. So the leadership of OMF was praying to have people based in Latin America who, with that desire. We weren't the first to be here with OMF, but obviously it's very small in number. And one of the reasons is that there are Latin Americans with OMF, but very few, and we could see the potential of the Latin American church. And so it was an intentionality on OMF's part that brought us here in response to God's call to be making known the needs of East Asia and also the opportunities.
I was just going to say as well, like, providentially, you also have a little bit of an experience with the language based on previous ministry. Because if memory serves me correctly, Mozambique speaks Portuguese, and so do people in Brazil. And it's just a little bit of those things being added together in the great picture that God is putting together in people's lives, that he has given us those experiences which now are all coming together. That's really cool to see and to hear. I wonder, just quickly, we can explore more to do with your role and what that looks like, and maybe a little bit about the church in Brazil, and maybe in as much as you can, the wider context of Latin America. But I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about the pandemic and the situation of COVID-19 in Brazil, because obviously it's something in the media in the UK that we have seen a lot about. And just even recently there was demonstrations within Sao Paulo, which were questioning the government's handling of the pandemic over the last little while. Could you just give us a bit of a picture about that and what maybe life's even been like for you and those who share the same city as you?
I think, so briefly sketching out the pandemic and the situation here, I think one of the main challenges that Brazil has faced during the pandemic has been challenges around political leadership. So Brazil, the pandemic or the virus arrived sort of March last year. The Minister of Health at the time started to take some very effective action and started to lead and give direction, taking the pandemic seriously, and immediately ran into trouble with his bosses and eventually stepped down within a month or so because he felt that he was not able to move forward with what he felt was an appropriate sort of science-driven response. And actually, I think one of the main words that we might use to describe the response of the government has been negationism. So it's just negated constantly that there is a serious problem, which has led to a situation developing that is very tragic, and the tragedy is worsened by at least some aspects of the situation being avoidable. So Brazil does have a well-developed national health system. It's actually patterned on the British health system. Brazil has some world-leading research institutes. Brazil actually holds the record in the past for vaccinating 9 million people in a single day. This is in a different time, a different disease. So it had the kind of the infrastructure and so on and so forth, some of which has been neglected more recently. But basically, the economy was placed above people's health, wanting to keep the economy open, denying that there was a problem, refusing to purchase vaccines when they're available. I think the situation was also worsened by the fact that even when there were stay-at-home orders, often put in place by state governors, the federal government immediately took those state governors to court. So the state governors were trying to manage the pandemic at the same time as having to invest time and energy in dealing with the legal challenges that they were facing. For many poor people in Brazil, they did not have the option of not going to work, or they had to keep on turning up physically to work. And of course, to say I'm ill or whatever, or to stay away when you're ill was often not a problem, was not possible. That led to rapid spread of the virus in those communities as well, which led to a situation of very high death rate. The biggest cemetery in Latin America is here in Sao Paulo. It's running 24 hours a day. So because people are dying, the suffering has been intense, and it's been very, very challenging for so many people. We're approaching 500,000 deaths, is it now?
Yeah, 165.
Around 16 million people who have been infected, and that may be an underestimate. So I think that in some ways it's the challenge or the contrast of the fact that Brazil in so many ways is so rich and has so developed, and yet people have slipped through. It's kind of exposed the divisions, exposed the challenges of a divided and contrasting society, and exposed the way that the poor and neglected are often, treated in a situation like this. Sorry, that's quite a long answer, but I think there's a lot of anger that has come about, that's being generated, which is why we're seeing these demonstrations now.
And I think, Martin, you ask us how it's affected our work. What we've imposed on ourselves is a self-imposition, because we could still be traveling. So as mobilizers, as those looking to partner with other agencies and sending churches, we are normally traveling. Of course, obviously, Brazil is vast, and so we have a presence on the internet, and people are contacting us through the internet usually. But when it comes to actually building relationships, then we travel usually. We could have carried on, but we've said no. This is crazy, and so we've restricted ourselves to remain at home, which is what we've done for over a year now, and tried and worked on building relationship, of course, via Zoom. But the traveling, the restrictions we've had are because we've made them, because we want to take care. So in one sense, there's a part of our work that's carried on via the internet, and there's another part of our work which is being absolutely curtailed, because we're not traveling anywhere to meet new partners in person and build relationships that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really helpful for us to hear about the situation, and by no means apologise for giving us a little bit of an insight into that. It's so sad to hear. It's just one of those time-old things that humanity does in response to God's goodness and provision for us, as we elevate that which is a created thing to the point of deity, to the point of being God in life. And so sad that economics gets bumped right up above the priority of human life and existence. I've just been finishing off looking at a section in Revelation 18, and there's just a list of different things, and the really sad reality of that list is that it ends with human souls, human beings being seen almost as the bottom of the pile of commodities that the empire trades. And it's just so sad that we can lose sight of the value and dignity and worth that is given to humanity. So thank you for sharing that, and also I suppose gives us something to pray for those who are listening, who want to pray, who are followers of Jesus. Then there's clearly some stuff there to pray for the government and also for the churches as well, to be wise and sensitive.
So, Martin, just seizing on your last comment there about churches, just to say that we are part of a really lovely church here in Sao Paulo that is led by a group of 3 leaders that have really been encouraging the congregation as a whole to demonstrate their love for each other and to demonstrate their love for society at large in terms of the way that they've acted during the pandemic. And it's been really outstanding, the leadership that they've provided, in contrast, if you like, to some of the other styles of leadership that we're seeing. I think they've also, Zia Machado, one of the leaders, has also been encouraging the church to learn to lament in the middle of it, and has talked about the fact that we need to allow what's going on. When he's talking about he's talking about Brazilian society and the Brazilian church, to allow what's going on to challenge superficialism and superficial optimism. That optimism is actually naivety, and pessimism is atheistic. But what we need to seek is hope, the hope that only God can bring. So I think that approach has been both pastoral and an encouraging, very profound response to what's going on here in Brazil. We've also seen a real increase in prayer and intercession, which has been huge, and getting together with other mission leaders now on a weekly basis, called by the Association of Transcultural Missions of Brazil. There are signs of God at work in the middle of a very dark situation as well.
It was one of the things I was just about to ask you there. Have there been some really positive things that have come as a result of what have been restrictions? But I think that's really helpfully answered that. A little bit more then about your role. You were saying, Anna, that obviously you've kind of had self-imposed restrictions, which seems quite wise given the current setup. What are some of the relationships that you guys are working through and developing at present? And I suppose touching on one of the questions that we flagged up earlier on is, what are some of the key trends that you see developing within the church in Brazil more widely?
We as we engage with those who contact us and are themselves already exploring what God is saying to them and calling them to do, we've just been encouraged to see how we arrived. We had so much to learn, Martin. We got here and we were reminded like never before that we are lifelong learners, that our journey with the Lord is one of perpetual learning. And we had so much to learn, right down to the Portuguese they use here is so different to the Portuguese we learned 30 years ago in Portugal, and then different to the one we used in Mozambique, those kind of things. But coming here, we felt that God gave us the opportunity and the privilege to see what He was already doing, and we were a tiny part of. One couple who said to us when we arrived, "Now you're here, we think the door will open for us to get to East Asia," and sure enough, there they are serving in their second year in Thailand with OMF. And so we are privileged to see what God is doing. And I think an encouragement in the last year has been to see, we couldn't go to their farewell service or anything, but to see a family follow the Lord to Cambodia, from Brasilia, from the capital of Brazil, to a long journey for them, but amazingly how God did that and opened the door during the pandemic. So they went at the end of October last year. We've been witnesses to that, if you like, and just played a tiny role along the way. So that's the sort of the kinds of things we're involved in. And it starts often with an email or a WhatsApp Brazilians love WhatsApp and social media. Honestly, we've just half of our day is spent on WhatsApp, just interacting with people. And they say, do you really speak Portuguese? Are you really focused on East Asia? And is there any way that you can help get us to East Asia? So it's those kind of things. We see ourselves as a bridge, really, facilitating what God is doing in partnership with the Brazilian Mission Agency. And that's been another learning thing. How do we function in dual membership? Because we belong to OMF, but we also belong to this mission agency here, Sao Paulo. And they have said, would you serve with us? Would you be part of our candidate selection team? And again, learning how they do it and perhaps being able to draw on our experience over the years. That has been a blessing for us and a challenge of being part of a Brazilian mission agency and exploring how we work together and screening people for Romania and places in the world that OMF doesn't send to, but recognising our part in the partnership that we have with that agency.
Would you say that there are any particular trends in terms of what am I trying to say? Within Brazil, a huge nation, big population. Within the church, I think, Steve, you kind of touched on this, learning the theology of lament, for example, I suppose, and working that through as a result of the pandemic. Are there any particular threads or trends that you can see coming up in the world of mission in Brazil and within the Brazilian church that we as believers in, say, Scotland, the UK, can learn from, or just general observations?
Sure. I mean, I think it's some of the things that we've discovered here in Brazil, we've also realised are happening in other parts of Latin America as well, which, by the way, is so much more diverse than we expected. It's not just Portuguese speaking and Spanish speaking. There's so much diversity within the continent as a whole. But I think that the evangelical church in Latin America has been marked by growth over the last 40 or 50 years ago, from a relatively small base. But there were many faithful believers in the decades before that laid the basis in some ways for what's going on now. I think there's been there's been a very full-orbed commitment to working out what discipleship of Jesus Christ or to Jesus Christ means, not only in the private but also in the public sphere. And I think that Brazilian and Latin American more widely, for example, René Padilla, who just died recently, they've brought not a liberation theology but an integral mission understanding that is the good news of Jesus Christ in all its fullness that we want to declare, a broader approach that affects every part of humanity and affects the physical as well as the spiritual. So it's been encouraging to see that at work. I think we've discovered that churches in this part of the world expect to grow. So there's an expectation of growth. I think there's a confidence in the gospel and a commitment to learning and teaching the word of God that can vary to a certain extent. There's a very kind of solid core under that. I think there's a sense of God's power, that we need help and we should ask for help. And I think the Pentecostal movement in Brazil has had an impact, if you like, on some of the mainstream denominations in that sense as well. And I think we also sense there's a growing sense of confidence of being part of the international missions movement, that God has blessed this part of the world with growth. And that blessing is not to be kept to themselves, but to be shared. And wanting to do that and seeing themselves in this part of the world once again increasingly not so much as a mission field but as a mission force. I don't know if there's anything you want to know. I think just on the kind of the missiological side of things, there is work to be done still in reaching peoples in Latin America. We discovered the whole concept of the green window. So the unreached peoples in the sort of the Amazon area, and also the fact that although there is the Portuguese and the Spanish speakers, there are vast numbers, tens of millions of indigenous peoples. For example, in Mexico, 25 million indigenous peoples in 300 people groups, often relatively unreached with the gospel, but responsive when the reaching goes on. As far as the international missions movement is concerned, there's a huge amount of interest in the Islamic world, and in the Middle East and North Africa and so on, but there's very little awareness of the Buddhist world or the Islamic world of East Asia. And so we were here at the invitation of the Latin American missions movement, actually, who had already identified that as being an issue, and were hoping that OMF could play at least a little part in addressing that lack of awareness, bringing awareness, and then seeing what God would do in terms of seeing East Asians reached with the good news of Jesus and all its fullness.
We experienced, Martin, in our interactions with other mission agencies, that their focus has very much been on Africa and deepest, darkest Europe, and the need and influence to see those as mission fields. When you start to go further east, possibly India, but beyond that, it has, in our experience, been a virtual unknown. So one of the things that I've just loved doing is sort of opening the window on East Asia and saying, look at what's happening, look at the needs of that part of the world, and look at the opportunities. And it has been an eye-opener, and it continues to be an eye-opener because of the focus historically on Africa, Europe, and just about India if you're lucky. So that sort of focus has been a challenge to us as we've come in, and no one's heard of OMF here. If you're lucky, they've heard of Hudson Taylor, but no one's heard of OMF.
I think it's been good not only to engage with Brazil, but to see what's going on in some of the other Latin American countries. And I think some of the countries where the missions movement has grown and is continuing to grow would be Argentina, Mexico, which is becoming a very serious player, Chile, which is punching above its weight despite its small size as a nation, and also just what God is doing in Peru. I mean, it's just extraordinary to see the mission involvement, mission engagement, and growing missions movement coming out of Peru. So that's been a huge encouragement to us.
Well, I'm sure for some people who are listening on, they will have prayed for Peru for many years. Many of the churches in the Free Church been associated with work in Peru for a number of years, and just to hear that the growth of the church and the development of the church to be involved in cross-cultural international missions is something which I'm sure is a cause to give thanks to God for, and a great encouragement to those who are listening. Our time is pretty much up, guys. I could go on. I mean, everybody knows that I can go on, but it's been so good spending time chatting with you and catching up. And it's a real encouragement to hear of a church which recognises that the church in Brazil that recognises it needs the Lord to sovereignly work and empower, but also has a confidence in the Scriptures and has a love for God in a holistic way, to see Jesus made known in all of his fullness to the peoples of the world. That's not exactly a bad place to be involved in ministry. that's really encouraging. And that gem, this is so good that we don't want to keep it to ourselves. The the church recognises this is good news for all the peoples of the world. Can I just say thank you to you guys for joining us, and thank you to everyone who's been listening. I hope that you've found this encouraging, thought-provoking, and maybe enjoyable as well. But please tune back in for the next episode of the Generation Podcast, and we hope to see you then. Thanks and goodbye, Steve and Anna. Thanks for joining us.
Bye. Thank you, Martin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.